For confession, we were taken to church during a school day once per month, and we formed several short lines at the confessional doors. There was a nameplate on each of the 4 center doors with the name of the priest inside each confessional. This was helpful to us students, since there were some priests we could talk to and some we simply could not. So the lines of students at the confessionals were not all the same length. We were allowed to pick which confessional we wanted to go to, but only until such time as when the lines become very different from each other. One short, one long. When one priest had no students in line waiting to talk to him, a nun would typically tell us that some of us needed to switch lines. We were reluctant to change our selection, and only a few would volunteer to recreate a line outside a confessional. Confession seemed like quite a stretch. When my turn came, a little light went off on the door. I opened it and walked in. It was a tiny little space with a yellow, comfy swivel chair and a tiny little table next to it with a Bible on it. I sat down and took it all in. I was a very observant kid, and I realized right away that this was a special place. It was dark and cold and very quiet in there. My chair sat very close to the priest. I remember I went to Father Mackey on my first confession because he was the nicest priest available at the time. As I predicted, he made it easy. It went something like this. Father, forgive me, I've sinned. This is my first confession. Very good, son. Now let me start with a short prayer. And then he'd say some new prayer I hadn't heard before. Then he did a quick blessing, and he asked me to list off my sins. I remember having trouble with that because I couldn't remember doing anything bad enough that I would need to confess and ask forgiveness over it. So I scratched my brain and came up with some minor things. I cussed, I fought with my sister. Think, Joe, think. It was considered unacceptable to not confess at least a handful of sins. The whole idea is that confession exists because humans are full of filthy sins. And because confession exists, that part about humans having lots of sins must be true. It was circular logic, and we were all tied up in it every day. Is there anything else? Well, one day I pulled up some rocks from a path our neighbor had made between our houses. They didn't like that, and I had to put them back. I said I was sorry, too. That seemed to count as a proper sin in confession. I had to use their logic, since I didn't know about any other logic yet. All right, then, let us pray. Do your act of contrition. Shit, I didn't know that prayer. Father, I don't know that one very well yet. Can we do another one? Sure, how about the Apostles' Creed? Sorry, Father, I don't know that one either. Well, then the Our Father. Whew. Finally one I knew. After I recited that, he blessed me again and said I needed to go say 50 Hail Marys, and it was finally over. It was so awkward to me that it seemed to last an hour, even though it was less than 5 minutes. There were a lot of other sinful students they had to see. I walked out of the little room and closed the door behind me, and immediately another kid went into the door to the anonymous side and went in. Business was good as long as it was also required. I walked over to the first row of pews up front and knelt down. I knelt next to other students, and it was like an assembly line. Wait for confessional, go in, do your business, leave, then kneel up front for a few minutes, then leave the church, and go to lunch, usually. I tried to time everyone I saw kneeling so I wouldn't get up too soon, and I wouldn't waste too much time there when the lunch was calling. Prayer itself was definitely not on my mind. But I had to pray anyway. We had rosaries issued to us by the school, and if it looks odd and even archaic to see an adult praying with a rosary, imagine being a boy and using one. I felt downright feminine. Most of all, I felt foolish for kneeling to a statue and thinking to myself. Thinking was great, but it was hard to not think about the physical situation I was also in at the time. Kneeling always hurt me, but we could never question or complain about religion or the religious requirements we had. So I suffered in silence and learned how to do that effectively. When I pretended to pray, I thought to myself. I asked myself questions. I searched. I spent a lot of time calling out to God in my prayers. As a younger student, I totally believed it all and sincerely begged God to speak to me. After years of hearing nothing back, my prayers became fewer and farther in between, as I spent more time on my knees pretending. I ended my sincerity with the prayer, God, if you exist, would you please help me? I'm having a lot of trouble in life, and I think you owe me. That's not audacity. That's a human talking to their loved one. I performed for God, and God never performed for me. I needed help at that time because, for a lot of the time I spent at that school, I was bullied. Several more popular boys would put me around and beat me up from time to time, and it was all a natural and normal part of the school day. I was a skinny, goofy-looking kid, and I had a funny last name. I was an easy target. Now, when someone tells you, hey, don't complain, it reminds me of all the years I didn't complain and what good that did me or anyone else involved.